Hello everyone, this is our last plant video. This plant video is going to go over some of the stuff that we'll talk about during the freshman retreat so that you can watch this video and get yourself caught up to get ready for next Wednesday's exam. I understand that some of you might not care about plants as much or don't really find this topic very exciting compared to some of the other things that we talk about, and that's okay. I was like that for a long time and I still don't care about plants as much as animals. But one way to help you get through at least the stuff that we talk about and get you through the exam is to kind of think about why exactly are we talking about plants? Basically, none of us would ever be here without plants because plants produced oxygen for Earth, and Earth originally didn't have that much oxygen until plants came around. So anything that breathing oxygen at all really should thank plants, even though plants don't really talk to us on a daily basis and it doesn't look like they're doing a whole lot. Really, plants are really, really important for the entire ecosystem that we live in and for our survival, right? So in class, we talk about this picture that was on Wednesday. And what are some things that you actually need to know from this picture? The sepal is really important because it protects the flower before it blooms. We already know the petals, so I'm not going to ask you about that again. It's too easy. And petals attract pollinators. One really important part is to know that some flowers have only male flowers. Well, some plants only have male flowers. Some plants only have female flowers. And there are also plants that has flowers with male and female part. So the picture shown to you over here, we can call it a perfect flower because it has everything a flower should or could ever have. So for a perfect flower, for example, there's the male part and female part. And you need to know the male part is called a stamen, and pollen is produced on the anther. And then for the female part, the entire female part is called carpel, and pollen from the anther can pollinate the female part starting at the stigma. So stigma is a little sticky. So if you were to take a Q-tip, if you see a flower, you take a Q-tip and put the Q-tip on the anther a little bit and on the stigma a little bit, you're doing the pollination. But normally plants don't see people using a Q-tip, so that's why pollinators are really important for plants. So then after the pollen gets stuck onto the stigma, it can travel down the style and then produce an embryo, or at the beginning a fertilized egg in the ovary. This is the entire ovary, and these tiny things are called the oval. So it's more important for you to remember the purpose of these different structures. So for example, the filament supports the anther. That's pretty easy to remember, rather than trying to remember all these names. But they're not. You probably know a lot of these words already, but so it shouldn't take you too long to remember the anatomy of a flower. So the next one is, how do plants grow? You see plants growing all the time. If you put seeds in the ground and you don't even have to water it, the nature will take care of it. It might just start growing. But how exactly does that happen? Just like human, where we start with an embryo, and we start with an embryo and then it divide, and then it turns into you. And as the years go on, you get taller, you get fatter, thinner, whatever. But you're growing too. How does anything grow? Anything can grow because of the division of cells, and we've talked about that. So it's the same thing for plants. Plants need to grow, and how plants grow is dependent on the division of cells, the dividing cells. So the one thing, just like human who have stem cells that can specialize into any cell. So a human embryonic stem cell is a stem cell from a human embryo, and that stem cell can be turned into any type of cell. It can turn into an eye cell, it can turn into a hair cell, your skin cell, lung cell, blood cell, whatever. Plants can do that too. Plants have something called the meristem tissue. Right? For us, it's called the stem cells. For plants, it's called the meristem. It's not too hard. Meristem is the unspecialized and continually dividing plant cells. So those meristem tissues can be divided into any type of plant tissues. It can turn into a flower, it can turn into root, it can turn into a leaf, anything. Okay, so that's the most well, one of the most important part of a plant. How do plants grow? Again, there's a primary growth and a secondary growth. Whenever you see a primary growth, whether we're talking about a plant or the root or the stem of a plant, whatever, the primary growth is the vertical growth of a plant. So how do plants grow taller? See, the vertical growth of a plant. And specifically, what's in charge of the vertical growth is called the apical meristem. So apical kind of means top. The meristem is what's in charge of making more divided specialized cells. So apical meristem make this plant over here grow taller and taller and taller and taller. And it's located at the buds or the shoots and the tip of the roots. So if you think about roots, roots need to dig deeper and deeper. So those stem cells allow the root cells to divide and then make the roots grow deeper to the ground. And then the shoots, so the shoots are the tip of the plant. It makes that part grow as well. So we call these kind of vertical growth, top, bottom growth, a primary growth. The next one is called before that, we talk about a root. So for root, there's the root tip. That's the mostly dividing cell. So if you look at this picture right here, there are three regions of a root. There's the area of cell division, where most of the cell division happens. So you can imagine if you want a root to keep on dividing and digging deeper and deeper, you have to have cells that can divide. So the tip of a root is called an area of cell division, where there are a lot of cells that can keep on dividing. The second part of a root is called an area of elongation. So long is when something elongation is when something gets longer, right? So area of elongation is when a plant cell gets longer and longer. So it's not dividing and making more of the plant cell, it's just becoming longer. So you can think about how that can also make the root go deeper in the ground. The third part, the top part, is called the area of maturation. This part allows the growth of root hair. So these root hair, these tiny hair on the root, all allow plants to absorb more water and nutrients. So this is the area of maturation. So let's take a look at the nose part. Root growth is mainly at the root tips, right? Like we said, there are three zones. We talked about the three zones. Root cap digests soil. Oh, good point. So this bottom part not only divide and grow more deeper into the ground, well, could grow much deeper in the ground. Root cap also allow the digestion of soil. So if the root does not have enough force to go all the way down, the digestion of the soil, the removal of the soil itself, also allow the absorption of some of the potentially the nutrient in the soil, and also get rid of the soil so that the plant can grow deeper. So if you've seen a plant, growing in a gap, really plants are really strong. So if you press your finger into a brick, you're not gonna, well, likely not gonna be able to break it, but you've seen plants growing in between bricks, and that's pretty impressive. The next one, so we talked about this zone of cell division, actively dividing cells, right? Zone of elongation, where the cell elongates and push downwards. So if you look at this picture right here, this is our normal plant cell. It got longer. Here's a dividing cell, so from one cell into multiple cells. The last one is a zone of differentiation. That's the top part of the plant root, and that's where the plant cell actually specializes into certain types of tissues. Okay, right here, so these are the area of maturation. So here's another picture showing you root cap, zone of cell division, zone of elongation. So you can see the plant cells are getting longer, and then here's the part of zone of differentiation where plant cells specialize into other types of cells, right? Dermal, ground, vascular. So we'll talk about those as well. So what do you actually need to know from this? Basically, the three zones of root and what they do. The next one is, how do plants grow? the next one on how the plants grow, we've been talking about this. It's on secondary growth. Secondary growth is the lateral growth, meaning so instead of vertical going top and bottom, it's going in all directions sideways. So if a plant gets fatter, or it's growing branches outward from the main trunk of the plant, then we call that a secondary growth. You definitely need to know the difference between a primary growth and the secondary growth. The next one, what are the three principal organs of seed plants? The three principal organs, if you just remember one of these pictures, or just look outside, there are plants outside. What are the three most important parts? There's the root, there's the stem going all over the place, and there's the leaves right here. If you turn this on, you can actually, anyway. The next one, what exactly do roots, stem, and leaves do? You should have a pretty good idea on what they do, but we'll just talk a little bit more in detail, and I'll let you know what's the most important part for you to remember. The first one is roots. The function of the roots is to hold the plant and soil in place. It can also store food. So if you think about a plant, especially think about a potato or a carrot, right? Potato and a carrot has a lot of, or a peanut plant. Those are all parts of roots of a plant, and we can use them as food. So for a plant itself, those are also very good areas that can store food. So roots can store food, just remember that. It can absorb water, obviously. It can dissolve nutrients and then bring in the dissolved nutrients from the soil. And it can hold the plant and soil in place. So these are just common sense questions. I'm not going to ask you to write an essay about what the roots do, but if you see a multiple choice asking about roots, it should be pretty easy to answer. Other things about roots, ecological relationships. When we talk about bacteria and fungi, we talk about how they can have a mutualistic relationship with plants, and here we go. Bacteria and fungi sometimes can be nitrogen fixing, meaning that the nitrogen air within the air that we breathe every day really couldn't do anything. When we breathe in the nitrogen, we just breathe it right out because we can't process that nitrogen and actually use it for anything. But nitrogen is actually really important because nitrogen is in our nucleic acid. Our DNA needs nitrogen. There's no nitrogen, there's no DNA, and there's no us. Nitrogen is also really important because it makes proteins. Every single protein, every single amino acid has nitrogen in it. So it's important to have nitrogen, and we know for a human, we cannot breathe in nitrogen and actually use it. So where do we get our nitrogen? We get it from the animals that we eat, or we get it from the plants that we eat. And when we eat an animal, that animal eventually down the line had to eat a plant. Okay? So remember our food chain, everything starts with the plant doing photosynthesis, right? And making the food. But even for a plant itself, in order to make a plant at all, we need bacteria and fungi to help fixing the nitrogen in the air. So even a plant itself usually cannot use the nitrogen in the air. The bacteria and fungi is what actually turns the air nitrogen into a form that plants can use, and then plants turn it into amino acid and nucleic acid, and then when another animal eats that plant, it gets those basic nitrogen sources. So we've been on this slide for a long time and you're not seeing me, but hopefully you were able to pay attention to that part. It really helped you recognize why exactly is plant doing this. So plant has this mutualistic relationship with bacteria and fungi, which helps the root absorb water and nutrients. So you can see over here we have some fungi filament that helps the plant absorb all that nutrients, and here are some bacteria growing on the roots of the plants. So this is a good relationship to have. It's better than a lot of relationships that go on. The next one about roots is the structure of the roots. I'm likely not gonna ask you specifically what the epidermis do exactly without providing you a picture. So what I would do is to give you some sort of picture like this, And you can see the epidermis. Where did it go? The epidermis is like on the outside. It's not in this picture. Oops. Oh no. And anyway, the epidermis is like the outer side of the roots. The epidermis of a human is our skin. So that's what covers the whole thing. What you need to know about epidermis is it has a large surface area for absorption of what? Of absorbing water and nutrients. That's the only purpose, well, the main purpose for a root, for a plant. The next one is the cortex. The cortex is right here. So these cells, that's right on the inside of the epidermis. So what they do is that they store starch and other food. The reason why this is important is if you think about a plant, in the winter and in the fall and in the spring for Maryland, it doesn't have any leaves, right? Or most plants, unless it's an evergreen. Those plants don't have any leaves. So how exactly is it getting nutrients in winter? Because it was only getting nutrients from photosynthesis. But you can't do photosynthesis or do nearly as much photosynthesis in winter because there's no leaves. So how does this work? That's because just like human can survive without food for a while because we store our food or store energy in fat, plants also store starch and are the type of food within the plant. And specifically, plants store a lot of that food in the roots. So in winter, a plant will use up a lot of the stored food. It will bring these stored starch into all different areas of the entire big plant and then break them down and use the energy to allow the cells to live through winter. So it's pretty important. Okay, the next one is, so that's how plants survive through winter at all. It's kind of fascinating because I didn't know in the past, well, a few days ago I didn't know how plants were able to survive through winter without leaves, because we know leaves do photosynthesis. But now we know. The next one is steel. Steel is, it's not labeled right here, but on your paper, I want you to label where steel is. So steel is, if you look at this picture, it's this middle part of the cross section. So this picture is actually a cross section of a root. So steel is this middle part. Steel is the vascular cylinder. Is that right? It's a cylinder shape. If it's not a cross section and if you make it longer, it's going to be a cylinder shape right here in the middle. It's a vascular cylinder, consists of vascular tissue. What you need to remember about vascular tissue is that xylem and phloem is the vascular tissue. Which one transports water? Which one transports food? Think about that. So now you know about steel. The last one is the endoderm. The endoderm is right here for this picture, or right here for this picture. The endoderm is wrapped with something called the Casparian strip. Is this purple strip right here. What the Casparian strip is that it only selects certain minerals and certain nutrients to enter the vascular tissue. All right. So this middle part, the vascular tissue, is what actually deliver the food and water, the nutrients and the water. So before whatever material that's in the soil is able to get into this middle essential part, is basically the bloodstream of plant, it has to do kind of like a selection process. So this Casparian strip is kind of like the border control for roots. It makes sure that whatever enters the inside, whatever enters the vascular cylinder of a plant is what the plant actually needs and not some sort of bad toxin, because there's definitely plenty of those in the soil as well. The next one, a difference between taproot and fibrous root. A taproot is something that goes straight down and doesn't have as many branches, doesn't have as many, what do we call it, secondary growth of the roots. And fibrous root has a lot of secondary growth and is fibrous and goes in all different directions. What you need to remember is that taproots, well, if I give you this picture, you should know which one is taproot, which one is fibrous root. If you can remember one of them, fibrous root is fibrous, then you know the other one is called taproot. A taproot is for dicots mostly. and fibrous root is mostly for monocots. The next one is about stem. You know what a stem is. The stem produces leaves, right? Branches, more branches, and it can produce flowers. These are pretty easy. Support the plant body. Obviously, if there's no stem, the plant is just going to collapse into a puddle. But anyway, supports the plant body. And then it can transport nutrients and water to other parts of a plant. If you look at a plant, any plant whatsoever, it gets the nutrient and water from the soil, so it has to send that all the way to the tip of the plant, which is a long way to travel. Even if, let's look at the tree outside our window right now. If you walk from the distance from the plant root to the tip, it'll take you probably a minute or two. So the stem can do all that transport without really using a whole lot of energy. It's pretty neat. The stem also has certain structures that you need to know. The most important part is the node. Just like the node in evolution, it looks just like this, right? It branches out. So we call this part of a plant also a node. It has primary growth and secondary growth. Again, primary growth is vertical, secondary growth is horizontal. Next one, we're moving on to leaves. Leaves are the main site of photosynthesis and gas exchange and prevent water loss. So what site of photosynthesis, we already know this. Gas exchange is important to know that gas exchange where oxygen is released by the plant and then carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the plant. But because photosynthesis is done at the leaf, this whole gas exchange process also has to happen at the leaf because those gas, carbon dioxide, which is being absorbed, has to be used for photosynthesis. So obviously it has to happen at the leaf. This is one really important part. It might be new for you. The leaves also prevent water loss. The leaf really actually allows a lot of water loss, but you have to, it's kind of a trade-off. You either do photosynthesis or you do water loss, but photosynthesis is a must-have, so water loss is just something that happens along with photosynthesis that you cannot prevent. You cannot completely prevent it. However, leaves do have mechanisms that can prevent some water loss, and that's really nice. So plants, can live even when it's not raining. So we'll talk about how exactly that's done in a minute. This next one is leaf structure. Leaf structure has a few parts. Again, this is also not going to be asked without a picture. So I'll show you a picture of just like this. But what you need to know is from this picture, along with what we talk about, what do these parts of a leaf do? What's the purpose of having these? So the first one, if you look at a typical leaf, a leaf has an upper side and it has a bottom side. The upper side has an epidermis. Again, remember the epidermis of a root is surrounding what's inside the root, and it kind of protects the root. And the same thing for epidermis for the leaf, it protects the leaf. So it does a lot of color, well, it can reflect some of the energy coming in from the sun, because if there's too much energy, then it's going to kind of burn the leaf. So the epidermis protects the plant. But also, you've seen some leaves that has some spiky structures on it, for example, or sometimes it has a lot of hair on it that also prevents certain insects from eating up all the leaves. So that's good to have. The next one is called waxy cuticle. The waxy cuticle is on the bottom. Here it is. The waxy cuticle on the bottom is what limits evaporation. So remember when we talk about the last slide, there's always a struggle for plants to get enough water and retain enough water. So waxy cuticle is a way that plants can prevent too much water loss. It can limit evaporation. So evaporation is water, liquid water turned into water vapor. The last one on this page is called guard cells. So these are called the guard cells on the side right here. These guard cells control the opening and closing of stomas or stomatas. So this middle part is called a stoma. I'll show you a picture in the next few slides. A stoma is basically the breathing the breathing tube of a plant. It's like the mouth of a plant, except for every single leaf, there are hundreds of stomas on there. There are hundreds of plant mouths on a leaf. That's kind of weird. But you get the idea. For a human, we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide through our mouth. And for a plant breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen through the stoma. So this is where it breathes. And when it's letting all that carbon dioxide into the plant, there's also the problem of water evaporating and coming out of the stoma. And if that happens too much, the plant is going to die because there's not going to be enough water. So these guard cells on the side is going to open up the stoma during the day when the plant needs to breathe in carbon dioxide and do photosynthesis, and the water loss is okay. And at night, the stoma is going to kind of close up because at this time, plant doesn't need to bring in as much oxygen because it can't do photosynthesis at night. And this is preventing water loss. And also when it's really hot outside, some of those stoma is going to close up a little bit so that not as much water evaporate out from the inside of the plant to the outside. So this is a cross section of a plant leaf. This next one is keeping on with the leaf structure, other structures. The first one is called palisade mesophyll, which is these compact part of the plant cell. So we have the upper protection layer, right? We have the bottom protection layer and the breathing tubes. On the inside of the plant is where photosynthesis actually happens. The first part is the palisade mesophyll, which is these very tightly packed, longer plant cells. And this is the main site that photosynthesis is done. So you need to really remember this. It's important. Photosynthesis is mainly done at the palisade mesophyll. You should say the word out loud right now. Say it. Palisade mesophyll. All right, the next one is called spongy mesophyll. The spongy mesophyll, if you think about it, spongy. Sponges has a lot of space inside. Spongy mesophyll has a lot of space inside as well. Whoa! Spongy mesophyll has a lot of these airspace. And what's the purpose of having all these airspace? This allows, remember, when air can come in through the stoma, right? But it has to travel all the way to the palisade mesophyll to get most of the photosynthesis done. So if all of the entire plant leaf cells are all tightly packed, then the air is harder to travel through. So these airspace allow carbon dioxide to travel through and then get to these important plant cells. The next part is veins. Veins are, right here. So these are all the veins, right? Just like for human, we have veins that transport nutrients and oxygen. For plants, there's these veins that can transport water and nutrients. And also, after sugar are made, they can travel backward and then eventually get to the roots and store them. Remember, for any plant cell, it is the vacuole that stores a lot of the sugar. So here's the veins. After we're done with the leaves, we're going to move on to the next video. Okay, here we have leaves maintaining homeostasis of plants. Okay, so leaves help maintain homeostasis of plants. For people, we maintain homeostasis in many ways. We maintain the temperature of our body, the amount of water in our body, right? If you, this is a little gross, but one typical way that we can maintain water is by reabsorbing water through the urine. So if you're urinating and the color is really yellow, that means your body absorbed a lot of the water from the urine because your body is not getting enough water. And then, as you might know, if you drink a lot of water, then your urine is clearer than the yellow kind, right? And the reason for that is because your body doesn't need all that water that you're drinking, so then it's getting released. So why am I talking about this? The reason why I'm talking about urine for people is because the leaves also maintain homeostasis of water. So one way that plants can do that is by keeping the stomata open. when photosynthesis is allowed to happen and when it's not too hot outside, but not so much when they're losing too much water. So when it's really hot, those openings on the leaves, those tiny mouth structures of a leaf, is making too much water getting out of the plant, and the plant doesn't like that. So then they close up some of these stomatas, and it's no longer a problem. So we can maintain enough water within the plant. So here it is. We have some closed stomatas. These ones, these, I don't know, coffee bean looking things are the closed stomatas. And then if you look right here, there are some open stomatas. All right. You really need to remember. All right, let's do a quick recap. You really need to remember what actually all of these do. Whoops. You need to know what these do. You don't have to remember where exactly it is because I'm going to give you a picture, but I'm going to ask you questions on what does an epidermis do? What does a guard cell do? Okay? What is the function of a leaf? What's the point of having stomata? Why does a plant need to maintain homeostasis? Water is important for photosynthesis. All right, the next one is on 3 main plant tissues and what are their functions. There are some really difficult words, and I'm going to tell you which words you don't have to know for the test, or you don't have to know too much detail. You might need to recognize those words and know that that's a part of whatever tissue, but I'm not going to ask you much more than that. But I'll tell you what it's about. So the first part that you do need to remember is the 3 main tissue system. There are 3 main types of tissues: dermal, vascular, and ground tissue. So the dermal tissue is the epidermis, is whatever is on the outside. So if you look at this plant right here, the green that you're seeing right outside, that's the dermal tissue. The roots, oh, this is green root, that's weird. The roots that has what's covering what's inside of the roots, that's the epidermis. Those are called the dermal cell. The vascular cell is what's in the middle. Right? Remember the vascular cylinder? That's the vascular cell. The vascular cell has 2 things: the xylem, the phloem. Xylem transports water, phloem transports food. And we'll get to, again, do a review of where are we transporting water from and to, and where are we transporting food from and to. The last one is called the ground tissue. The ground tissue is in the middle, and it mostly stores food. All right, continue on. The first one is the dermal tissue. The dermal tissue is the protective outer layer of a plant, just like how our skin protects us. Our skin is actually really important because if you break the skin, oh man. Well, if you break a skin and you don't close it up for some reason, then there's a lot of bacteria and viruses that are going to just go in there, and that's not good. So your skin is really important. So it's the same thing for plants. It needs a protective outer layer to protect it from all of the danger, all the bacteria, all of the bad insects for the plant. So here's the dermal tissue. And it usually consists of a single layer of epidermal cells. So this epidermal, this word is actually something that you should know. The dermal, epidermal, not too difficult. You got it. On the leaves, the epidermal cells are protected by the cuticle. So here are the cuticle, these outside layer, which protects against water loss. Okay. All right. Again, water loss is something the plant always needs to fight for, and cuticle is something that helps. Here's another picture of some other dermal tissue on the outside. So this one's just a very clean, you know, you can slide on it kind of dermal tissue, the epidermal layer. But in fact, plants, the plant leaves are pretty slippery sometimes, but it's not that slippery. And one reason for that is because most leaves have these little tiny hair on it. So if you look at a leaf very, very closely, you'll see these tiny hair on the leaf. And these are really important, and they're there for a reason, because first off, these tiny hairs are called trichomes. You should know this word, trichome. So these tiny hairs are really important because they can also protect the leaf from what? So for example, trichomes can reflect radiation. We know that it's good that the sunlight energy gets to the entire planet, and that's nice, but sometimes, actually all the time, the sunlight has too much energy for a lot of us. And for plants, plants need to reflect some of the radiation and absorb some of the radiation. And these trichomes help reflecting the radiation that the plant doesn't want, the extra ones. And then there's also, these trichomes can also lower plant temperature and reduce water loss. And also, if there are insects coming onto the plant, sometimes they, these trichomes might be spiky, and then the insects will go away then. The next one is still dermal tissue do not contain, okay, good point. If you look at this picture right here, right, the dermal tissue's main purpose, you need to know these tissues and the purpose, the function. The dermal tissue's main purpose is to protect, so it doesn't really need to do photosynthesis. So it does not contain a whole lot of chloroplasts and cannot photosynthesize. An exception are the guard cells. The guard cells that can modify whether a stomata is closed or open does contain chloroplasts. So this one is not as important. This next one is vascular tissue. You should be pretty familiar with the vascular tissue. Xylem, phloem, we've been talking about it for an entire week. Xylem and phloem are the parts that support the plant body, and it transports water and nutrient. Xylem transports water from the roots to everywhere else in the plant. Phloem mostly transport nutrient from the leaves, because that's where nutrients are made, to the rest of the plant. But specifically, after it's supplied all its need for nutrients for the rest of the plant part, is going to transport the nutrients, the food that's made, the glucose, into the roots and then store them there. So here we go. Some words that you don't have to know. It's just here because in case you're taking the SAT2, it's on there. But since I have a biology degree and I don't even know these words, you don't have to know it. Xylem contain tracheids and vessel element. So the tracheids are these ones. They're kind of like the bigger part. Well, first off, xylem transports water. So tracheids and vessel elements both transport water. So xylem, this one you do need to know. Xylem makes up wood. So when you see the wood outside, that has a lot of xylem in there. Well, the entire plant has xylem. Anyway, xylem makes up wood. Transpiration. So even when you cut a wood off, and when the wooden desk that we're sitting on right now, these are, well, in the back of our room we have wood desks. These wood has dead xylem tissues in there that makes the wood. All right. So the tracheids and the vessel elements are two words that you don't have to know, but you just need to know. Xylem transport water. So, but here is something that is really important. There's the word transpiration. I think we talk about transpiration. Transpiration is the evaporation of water from the leaves. So we know that leaves allow water to evaporate, and leaves need water for photosynthesis. But because leaves have all those surface area, water can be easily lost. But so water being lost from the leaf actually is really important for the mechanism of how we can get water to the entire plant. So if you think about if you were to drink a Coca-Cola out of a cup at a restaurant and they gave you a straw, when you're drinking, right, you kind of, in your mouth, you're creating a suction force for whatever that it is that you're drinking. And then as you're sucking the water into your mouth, or Coca-Cola into your mouth, that also pulls more water or Coca-Cola from the bottom of the straw. So a plant is basically a gigantic straw. When the water is coming out of the leaf, it creates a pulling force that pulls the water more from the soil into the roots, and from the roots to the tip of the plant, or the entire plant. Okay, so this whole process where the evaporation of water is done from the leaves creates a force that pulls water upward, and this is called a transpiration. Another way that you can, what else? Yeah, basically drinking water out of a straw, and thinking about plant as a straw where you pull up and the water come up can help you remember this. So transpiration is the water loss from leaves, right? there are certain factors that affect the rate of transpiration. How fast is transpiration being done? The rate of transpiration is decreased by high humidity and increased by wind and light intensity. So these two are easy to remember. Let's use our rationale to think through this. Wind, if you have a puddle of water on your desk, and if you were to blow on it, you can see that the water can evaporate a lot faster, and that tiny puddle of water on your desk is going to be gone a lot sooner, right? And we know transpiration, all right, you have to remember the definition of transpiration. Transpiration is water being lost from the leaves. So it's basically evaporation, except it's from the leaves. Wind, when there's wind, it's making the water evaporate a lot faster, so the rate of transpiration also increase. So this is the only part of this whole slide that you have to really use your brain to think about it, instead of memorizing it directly. The other one is light intensity. If you know, in the summer, if you go to a water park, you get all soaked up at the water park, or if you get all soaked up in the summer when it's really, really hot and there's a lot of light heat energy coming onto your entire body, the water evaporates a lot faster. Same thing for plants. When there's a lot of light, a lot of heat, temperature is really high in the summer, the rate of transpiration is also much higher. The next one, this might be a little hard to understand, is how can transpiration be decreased by high humidity in the air? Okay, here's how you can think about it. If you're drying, if something gets wet, right? Your clothes gets wet, and it's also really wet outside. It's about to rain. It's really, really humid. It's a lot harder for those clothes to get dried. It's not as big of a problem if you came from another country and you have to hang some clothes dry. But if you ever hanged anything dry, you know that it's a lot harder to make the wet cloths and wet clothes that you're wearing dry if it's really humid outside. So it's the same thing for plant. When it's really humid, the water is not as likely to come out. Okay? So this picture also explains to you how this works. Water, transpiration in plant is decreased by the humidity in the air. So if you look at this, if there's not very much water in the surrounding air, and there is a lot of water in the leaf, remember, molecules move from area of high concentration to low concentration, high to low when we talked about that last semester, right? So is water. Water moves from area of high concentration, which is in the leaf, to the outside, which is area of low concentration. However, if the air is really humid, then the concentration of water molecules are higher in the air as well. So the concentration difference, the high to low, is not as different. So then it's much harder for the water to move from high to low. It's still most likely higher concentration of water in the leaf and lower concentration in the air, even when it's really humid. But this difference in humidity is not as different, so then it's much harder for water to move out. This is really important. This will definitely show up on the test. Make sure you not only remember what decreases or increases rate of transpiration, but also understand it. We're almost done, and there are some things that you don't have to know from this slide as well. This is phloem. Phloem contains sieve tube element and companion cells. These are words that you don't have to know. Phloem transports food. This is something you do have to know. So what exactly is the food that we transport? The food that it transports is sugar, and the sugar is made in the leaves. Sugar needs to be sent all throughout the plant because, cellular respiration, where we produce energy, needs an energy source, and the sugar is the energy source that's required for all cells on the planet to function. So plants have to transport the sugar, and we call this translocation. You do not need to know this word. And it requires energy. This you do need to know. The transport of sugar needs energy. Okay? So you cannot just go sugar from higher area of high concentration to low concentration. It needs energy to bring the sugar to throughout the plant. Sugar is stored in the root, like we already said. But if you're interested, over here, sieve tube elements are the middle part of a plant sugar transporting tube, and the sieve plate is these plates that kind of filters some of the material, and then the companion cells are the ones that line up the phloem. All right. Next one is ground tissue, or finally onto the next tissue. Vascular tissue should be something that's really easy for you to remember. Ground tissue, you don't have to know that much about it, so you'll be okay. Ground tissues produce and store sugar and support plant structure. Okay? It produces and stores sugar and support plant structure. I don't have a good way for you to remember this, but hopefully this Coca-Cola picture can help you remember. It has something to do with sugar, ground tissue, sugar. Anyway, there are 3 types of ground tissue. I'm not going to ask you, this is another example where I'm not going to ask you questions without giving you a picture. So what you need to do is to remember this picture and what it's about. The first one is called the parenchymal tissue. The next one is called collenchyma tissue, parenchyma tissue. The last one is called sclerenchyma tissue. All right, these are interesting words that you can tell your parents about. Parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. All right, the first one is parenchyma tissue. Those are the ones that does most of the photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. Parenchyma tissue, photosynthesis. You need to remember this. Parenchyma tissue, photosynthesis. Say it one more time. Parenchyma tissue, photosynthesis. So parenchyma tissue, as you can see in this picture, has a very thin cell wall. Here's the cell wall right here on the outside. Very thin. Very large central vacuoles. So you can also see that in this picture, right? Large central vacuoles. All right, remember I'll give you the picture and then I'll ask you questions about it. Side of the plant's most of the plant's photosynthesis. One more time, parenchyma tissue, photosynthesis. Remember this. The next one is collenchyma tissue. Collenchyma tissue are strong, and it has more of a flexible cell wall, and it provides support for the plant. The one thing that you can remember is the strings of a stalk of celery. When you eat celery, I don't like celery. Marshy does. But if you've seen a celery at least, but it has all those strings inside, those are made out of collenchyma tissue, or collenchyma cells. Same thing. The next one is called sclerenchyma cells. Sclerenchyma cells are really thick, and they make up the rigid cell walls. And they can make ropes. That's where ropes came from, sclerenchyma cells. Another example is walnut shell. The walnut shell of a walnut that's really thick is made out of sclerenchyma cells. So, usually when you think about a cell, right, it seems quite small and fragile. The small is correct. The fragile is not really correct. There are a lot of very fragile cells, but there are also a lot of cells that are really, really strong. Sclerenchyma cells is an example of really, really strong and rigid cell. Our skin cell is actually pretty good at being strong, right? All right, there's an angry baby here. The reason why a baby is angry, or if anybody is angry, has something to do with hormone. And really, without hormone, your heart won't even be beating right now. So hormone is really important. When somebody tells you that you're being hormonal, I hope nobody tells you that, but you know, teenagers can be a little hormonal and be a little more moody and angry at times and illogical, but all human beings are. The most important thing for you to remember is that hormone, every single person is hormonal. The hormones are in your body and doing its job all the time, every single day. If somebody is not hormonal, that person is dead. Okay, anyway. But we're talking about plants. Plants also have hormones, and plant hormones are really important because without plant hormones, plant also cannot live. So here we have a very hormonal baby. Plant hormones serve as signals that control development of cells, tissues, and organs, just like they do for human beings. They also coordinate and respond to the environment. So for a person, for example, what is it? Let's say your heart, well, okay, you get frightened. and you feel the heartbeat and you start sweating and you might pee a little if you're really scared. Those are all things that are done because of the hormone that's responsible for the fight or flight response. But for plants, they also respond to the environment. In the next few pictures, what you don't need to know is which hormone does what. What you do need to know is that plants have responses to the environment, right? Plants respond to the environment, and we'll tell you how exactly that works. But hormones is what allows that. So the first one is auxins. This is the only hormone that you do need to remember what it does. So I could ask you a question, what does the auxin do? And you should know. The auxin does two things that are really important. It does all kinds of things, but there are two things that you need to know. The first one is apical dominance. Remember, apical means vertical, it goes upward. Apical dominance allows the tree to grow really tall. Okay, it grows tall first and then it grows outward. So this is a plant with very strong apical dominance. It's very tall and not very outward growing. This is a plant without very strong apical dominance. It's very outward growing and is not as tall. So this is one way that auxin can be important, makes the plant taller. Okay. The other one is auxins is responsible for this thing called phototropism. This is one word that you need to know. Phototropism. Let me highlight it. Phototropism. Phototropism is the tendency of plants to grow toward light. It's not as big of a problem for our plants in the yard of Georgetown Prep because there's plenty of sunlight. It can just grow normally. However, not every plant has the luxury of the enough sunlight. So if you think about a plant in a rainforest, there are too many plants around. There's not enough sunlight. What do the plants do? They have to grow toward the area with the most sunlight. And how does it do that? Auxin is what allows this to happen. Okay? Auxin allows the plant to grow towards sunlight. Sunflower facing the plant, that's auxin doing its job. Auxin is important. So auxin is actually released by the tip of a plant. And these are all auxin molecules, these pink ones. What auxin do is that it will concentrate in the area that's away from sunlight. See right here? Sunlight is coming right here. The auxin is distributed mostly in the area that's away from the sunlight. And then what auxin can do is that it makes the cell longer. So when all these cells are making these cells on this side longer, and what it allows to do, the plant to do, is to make the plant go towards sunlight because these areas are getting longer, these areas stays the same, it's growing towards sunlight. Auxin, apical dominance, phototropism. You need to know what a phototropism is. Okay, if you're in my class right now, and I'm actually there, but if it's Friday, I might not be there. I'm going to show you how phototropism works. I have a good plant example. So pause your video and ask me if both me and you are together. All right, the next one is called cytokinin. You don't really need to know exactly what cytokinin does unless you're really into biology and you want to take the SAT2 test. The cytokinin delays the aging of plants. So here's an old lady meme. Anyway, next one is gibberellins. Gibberellins promote stem and leaf elongation and the growth of floral stalks. So when a plant sprouts or just when it's growing taller, this is also gibberellin doing its job. The next one is called abscisic acid, or ABA. Abscisic acid inhibits growth and promote seed dormancy. So when a seed grows, right, when a seed actually sprouts, it has to sprout when there is enough water and sunlight. But when there's not enough water and sunlight, abscisic acid prevents the seed from sprouting. All right? It can also inhibit growth. So if a plant is not supposed to grow taller, it will inhibit the plant from growing taller. So here's an experiment that's being done. This one with abscisic acid is not growing taller than it should. And this one with abscisic acid is growing much taller. Last three slides. The first one, ethylene. Ethylene is a gas that promotes ripening. So you might have heard of this. If you put a ripe fruit with a banana that's not ripe, together or close to each other or in a plastic bag or in the fridge, then that will make your banana or whatever, the banana that's not ripe, get ripened much faster. So the reason why it does that is this ripened apple in here, release a lot of ethylene, which is a hormone, and it's a gas hormone. This gas allows the ripening of this banana. Another example is right here. Here's an experiment being done. These are grapes without ethylene, so it's not ripening, and then these are grapes with ethylene, and it's ripening. So ethylene, I would say, it's pretty easy to remember. I'm sure you've heard of ethylene outside of class. Ethylene is important for ripening, and you should know this for the test. We already talked about this. What is phototropism? Plants grow towards sunlight. Here's a picture right here. Plant growing towards sunlight. Oxygen is on the side without sunlight, makes the cell longer. Plant grows towards sunlight. Oxygen does the job. The last one. Woohoo! We'll never talk about plants again until final. Whoa! All right, phototropism. No. Gravitropism. Gravitropism, gravitropism is a plant response to gravity. And why is this important? Because if roots is growing upward and plant leaves are growing downward, this doesn't work because sunlights are upward and soil and nutrients and water are downward. So plant root has to respond to gravitropism, or we can also call it geotropism, by going downward. So roots, quote unquote, knows, but plants don't really know, to grow downward in response to gravity. And the shoots, the leaves and the shoots and the stem knows, quote unquote, to grow upward against gravity. All right. So if you ever want to do an experiment, I don't know, your mom plants something and you want to mess it up by tilting it sideways, the plant leaves and shoots should still grow upward, and then the roots are still growing downward in response to gravity. Gravity is important for plants as well. All right, now we're done. You do have to study this for the test, and then we're good.